Channel Sports Central will be going over our next final prediction of this offseason, and it will be over the West Virginia Mountaineers. And this is a team that was 5-7 in the 2019 season. And yeah, this is a team, of course, they had a new head coach last season, so that was it was kind of bound for West Virginia to have a bit of a down season, especially after losing their great quarterback Will Grier after the 2018 season. But how will this team do in 2020, and whether or not this team will make it to a bowl game in the 2020 season is what we're going over here today. We're also going to be going over your returning production along with a full preview and prediction on every game on West Virginia's schedule heading into the 2020 season. Anyway, with that being said, let's look at your season trends from 2019 for this team. Once again, they were 5-7 overall in 2019. They were 3-5 between September and October, and then they were 2-2 between November and the postseason. So, yeah, this is a team last season that was they weren't all that great. They definitely were pretty inconsistent, which was a big reason why they weren't as good as they could have been. But once again, the talent just was not really there last season for this West Virginia team. Once again, they were great in the 2018 season, but they just lost so much talent after that season. They had a very large senior class in that 2018 season. So, last season, many expected West Virginia to have a bit of a decline. But, at the end of the day, this is still a team that I think has got a lot of potential going into 2020 because of the fact of how young they were last season. Some key wins for you guys last season. You beat NC State, of course, 44-27. You also beat Kansas State on the road, 24-20. And that was probably your best win of the season. Kansas State last year, they were they were not all that bad of a team at all. They were ranked for a good chunk of the season. Plus, they were able to make it to a pretty decent bowl game. So, yeah, Kansas State was a pretty good team last season, but you also beat TCU 20-17. So, you also had a good win there against TCU. So, that November overall was pretty good for West Virginia. And they were really close to making it to a bowl game. Once again, they were one win away from making it to a bowl game, but it didn't happen last season. But I definitely think West Virginia should have a better chance in 2020 than in 2019 to make one. As far as the returning production looks, you return your top quarterback from the 2019 season in Austin Kendall, but you also return your second quarterback in Jarrett Doege. And of course, both of those quarterbacks split time last season, and Austin Kendall played for a larger amount of time, but he didn't put up as good of stats, I would say, as Jarrett Doege did when he was playing. Of course, Austin Kendall last season put up nearly 2,000 yards with 12 touchdowns and 10 interceptions, and he also had a 61% completion rate. So, those honestly are not all that terrible of his stats. Of course, his touchdown to interception ratio was pretty much horrendous, one of the worst in the conference. But, Jarrett Doege, when he did play last season, he had much better stats, I would say, even though he had a lesser amount of yards with 818. But he did have 7 touchdowns and 3 interceptions, so he had a better touchdown to interception ratio. But he also had a dramatically better completion percentage. Of course, he was right around 66% with his completion percentage. So he was a full 5% higher in the completion area than Austin Kendall was last season. So, yeah, Jarrett Doege definitely should be the quarterback to start up next season. But as far as the running back core looks, you return your starting running back, in Letty Brown. And, of course, Letty Brown last season had 512 yards with 2 touchdowns. So he had a decent impact on this team last season. He didn't put up a whole lot of yards. That's going to be good, especially for the quarterback, which will be starting for next season to have their top running back. However, they do lose their second running back in Kennedy McCoy, which he was a decent player last season, 490 total yards with 4 touchdowns last season. So that will be a loss for this team. I'm not saying it's going to be a very impactful loss, but still, you are losing one of your running backs. As far as the receiving core looks, you return your top wide receiver in Sam James, which he had 696 yards last season with 2 touchdowns, so he had a decent amount of yardage, especially on the receiving side. They also lose their second wide receiver in George Campbell, which last season he had 470 yards with 7 touchdowns. So, he didn't have all that big of an impact in comparison to Sam James, but he still was a big part of this team. So that probably will be the worst loss, I would say, on this offense. As far as the third wide receiver looks, in TJ Simmons, you're going to be returning him as well, as he had 450 yards with 4 touchdowns last season. So, the receiving core looks pretty good with Sam James and TJ Simmons leading the pack. I think they'll be just fine. I think Jarrett Doege in general will have a good receiving core to work with Sam James and TJ Simmons in general. So, even though you're losing George Campbell, once again, your second receiver, I still expect West Virginia to be just fine in that category. As TJ Simmons, he had just right around where George Campbell was last season. So, there was not a very big gap at all between TJ Simmons and George Campbell last season. As far as the offensive line looks, you lose 1 on there. You also lose 2 on the defensive line and 1 linebacker. You also lose 1 in the secondary. So this defense loses 4 starters, which really is not all that terrible. That's right around the average. Most defenses lose 4 to 5 starters for the most of the time. So for West Virginia, that really is not all that bad. And it brings up the question, chances of a bowl game in 2020. And honestly, for West Virginia, I think the chances are decent. I wouldn't say that they're good. I'd say it's pretty much a 50-50 shot for West Virginia next season. I mean, they're going to be very close to that 6-win threshold, and I think that they definitely could get up to it. But this West Virginia team is very tough to predict for next season. I mean, you gotta predict how the quarterback situation is going to look, which, I mean, with Jared Doge in there, it looks like he's going to be the starter. I think they'll be just fine there, but once again, it's just tough to say who's going to be or who's going to be your starting quarterback for one, and for two, whether this team is going to be good enough to be able to get up to 6 wins or not. But as far as your schedule looks, you start off the season with Florida State on September 5th, followed by 2 games against Eastern Kentucky and Maryland, and then you got a Kansas State game on the 26th. So, yeah, you get your first conference game on the 26th of September, and the only problem is for West Virginia next season is that you've got a tough non-conference game. I mean, if this team was able to have 3 pretty easy non-conference games, I mean, there's no doubt West Virginia would make it to a bowl game next season. But it's that Florida State game. I mean, Florida State next season, I think them and West Virginia should be right around the same amount of talent. I think they'll both be right around the same ballpark as far as having season records go. But yeah, Florida State in the end, I think they get the win in West Virginia. I think Florida State being a team that has much more upside than West Virginia does going into next season, I think it's just the logical way to predict that game is to say Florida State. I do think you get easy wins over East Kentucky and Maryland, though. I think both of those teams next season, I mean, especially Maryland, I mean, they're not looking very good at all going into next season, so I think they do win both of those games. However, you do lose to Kansas State in your first conference game. I think that one's going to be very close. It's going to be in West Virginia, which will be helpful, but I think Kansas State comes ready to play in that one and they get the win. But I think it's going to be close. I definitely think that both of these teams will be going back and forth throughout the entire game. I think Kansas State gets the win there in the end. So you go into your October with a 2-2 record, not all that terrible. But I think that in the October month, you're actually going to play pretty well. I think you get a good win against Texas Tech on the road on October 3rd, plus a great win against TCU on October 10th. And let me remind you, TCU is a team that I definitely think is a bowl team next season. TCU's got the ability to definitely improve up to that point. So I think TCU next season definitely is a team to watch out for. So I think, I mean, that's going to be a tough one, but I think West Virginia does get the win in the end. However, I do think you take a loss to Texas on the road on the 17th. I mean, Texas in general is a team that's tough to predict, but I think they'll have a good season, probably 9 to 10 wins, I would say, for Texas next season. And Sam Ehlinger, they're looking really good right now, and especially with them being at home, I think Texas is able to get the win there against West Virginia on the 17th. However, West Virginia, they come back the next week and get a big win against Kansas. So you're going to head into your November with a 5-3 overall record, which honestly is not all that bad. The only thing is now is that you've got a brutal November. You've got Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Iowa State, which I think all 4 of those teams are probably going to be in the top 5 of the Big 12 standings next season. I mean, it's going to be those 4 teams plus Texas, I think, that will be your top 5 in the Big 12 next season. And, I mean, having to play all 4 of those tough teams, at least you got Oklahoma and Baylor at home, but you have to play Oklahoma State and Iowa State both on the road. And I just think this schedule sets up terribly for West Virginia. I think at the end of the season, they do take a bit of a losing streak, and they lose all 4 of those games to Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Baylor, and Iowa State. And I'm sure, I mean, going into that November, all you need is 1 win to make it to a bowl game, and you got to beat one of those teams. But, I mean, unfortunately, I know as much as you West Virginia fans are going to want to win one of those games, I just think the schedule does not set up well for you to be able to win anything. And I think Oklahoma in general, like Oklahoma next season, they're definitely going to be a national contender. And then Oklahoma State as well, I think, should be a very improved team. They have potential to get up to 10 wins. And then Baylor, kind of the same situation as Oklahoma State. I think Baylor has potential to get up to 10 wins as well. And with Charlie Brewer in there, they're looking really good. And then you got that Iowa State game, your final chance on the road in Ames. I just think Iowa State next season, they definitely could make it to the Big 12 championship. It wouldn't surprise me at all to see them in that game at the end of the season. And with Iowa State being at home, I just think it's going to be too tough of a task for West Virginia. I think you finish off the season 5-7. And once again, I'm sure most of your West Virginia fans are going to be super upset about this. I mean, once again, I mean, this is kind of, it just is the way it is, and this is how I'm predicting it. But in the end, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd like to hear what you guys think about West Virginia next season. If you disagree with anything here, let me know your thoughts, and I'll try to get back to as many of your responses as I can. But at the end of the day, once again, 5-7, that's not all that terrible. I mean, West Virginia next season, once again, you got to consider that they still do not have the talent and the ability to get up to 6 wins. I mean, there's a good chance. I definitely think there is a chance that they could maybe get a win against Kansas State or Florida State maybe to get up to that 6-win mark. But once again, at the end, I just think West Virginia, they're not going to be good enough next season to get up to that mark. But yeah, once again, let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I'd like to hear what you guys think of West Virginia next season. But if you enjoyed this preview, be sure to slap a like on it and subscribe as well. It really helps out the channel. I'd really appreciate that. But as always, thanks again for watching. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central, and I'll see you all later.